Good morning or good afternoon, good evening to everyone who have taken the opportunity to join us this afternoon or morning, wherever you are, depending on wherever you are. I think in the interest of time, we have to start the session at a particular point in time. Oh, I can see that Professor Uchenna is here. He's the principal investigator in the project where these series of debates are happening alongside Professor Dr. Toko Kaime. So before we start, can I give the opportunity to Professor Uchenna just to say a few words before I introduce Habiba, who is our speaker today. Professor Uchenna, if you can hear me, you can unmute yourself and just say a few words.
Okay, thank you very much, Gift. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We really appreciate that you are here, and we look forward to the conversation we'll be having with our speaker and with everyone. The project, When the Law is Not Enough, which has myself and Professor Kaimi as principal investigators, and our team, Gift, Mitran, Isabel, and many other people involved. It's actually just an attempt to respond to a very important observation that we made in relation to the experience of human rights protection, or the idea of human rights in Africa, but also beyond Africa. This observation is the fact that the more, it seems, we try to realize the idea of human rights to ensure that the human rights of all within Africa is protected, the more we see that human rights abuses and the challenge of actually even understanding what we mean when we say human rights continues to persist. So we are trying to, in this project, understand the mechanisms that account for this situation and the possible responses we can develop from within the law, but also outside legal imagination. And that is why it is a very interdisciplinary project, and we are looking forward to having this conversation with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Uchenna, for the short introduction. Procedurally, we are requesting that we record this session for our records and for future use of the material that we'll gather here. And if you have got questions during the session, I would request that you write the questions in the chat box, and I will read them out to our guest today at the end of her presentation. Let me take this opportunity to introduce Habiba Osman, who is presenting for us today. Ms. Habiba Osman is a lawyer whose work has focused on human rights, gender, and governance. Habiba is currently the Executive Secretary for the Human Rights Commission in Malawi, a constitutional body that promotes, protects, and investigates human rights violations in the broadest sense possible, including advising the government on all areas of human rights. She serves on several boards, regionally and internationally. Habiba has previously worked for the UN and other international organizations as a gender and human rights specialist and advisor. She currently serves as an ambassador for the Global Youth Against Slavery movements, as an advisor to the World Leaders for Mental Health platform, and has also recognized as the Vital Voice Top 20 Women in the World in 2016. In 2022, she was appointed to chair trustees for the Association of Persons with Albinism in Malawi. Habiba graduated from Kile University in the UK with a dual honors degree in law and international history, and has an LLM in the International Human Rights Law obtained from Notre Dame Law School in the US. Habiba has written numerous articles on human trafficking, disability rights, gender-based violence, and various human rights topics. It is for these reasons that we thought that we should tap on her brains today to share her lived experiences in the work that she has done in Malawi. And let's be assured that she will share her insights from the ground. Habiba, it's a very pleasure for us to have you today and within this series of debates, which are running for about 6 weeks, starting from today up to November. And I give you the floor and let's hear what you prepared for us. Thank you so much, Habiba.
Thank you very much, Gift, for that elaborate introduction. Without further ado, I may begin also sharing my screen. So thank you very much, Gift, and thank you very much to the professors who've been very active behind the scenes. Just to say that the topic that I'm sharing with you today is on understanding the efforts of child labor in Malawi. Of course, I know that most of this work that is being undertaken is also through the Human Rights Commission, but I'll be able to also share the lived experiences as someone also who is sort of like a human rights defender, as well as an activist in this work. I sincerely hope that you can all hear me, because I think we had a little bit of a glitch there. And I think earlier on I had some preps with the team, and I mentioned that I think we are having a problem with electricity in Malawi, but we do have a backup. So I am happy that I'm online today. My outline really comprises of what the Human Rights Commission mandate is, the status of child labor in Malawi, the legal policy and program response as it relates to child labor, the lived realities and how this contributes to child labor, the opportunities, what should be done, and also our engagement as Malawi Human Rights Commission. And just to talk a little bit about the commission is a body, as Gift had shared earlier, which is established under the Constitution of Malawi, and its really primary function is broad as it encompasses issues of promotion, protection, and investigation of human rights violations. In this context, because we are on the subject matter of child rights, but also child labor, these are within the competence of the commission, and the commission is also empowered to be competent in every sense possible to investigate, broader human rights violations. And this can be received from organizations, individuals, class of persons, and bodies that have been affected. Again, I would like to share that more recently, the commission has also been given additional powers and functions prescribed by other pieces of legislation like the Gender Equality Act, as well as the Access to Information Act. What this means is that the commission in this respect is able to ensure the enforcement of the statutes, monitor the compliance of those statutes, facilitate legal remedies where there are disputes, and also assist in educating the public on the statutes. But at the same time, we are also able to develop recommendations regarding to the areas of the statutes. More importantly, I would also say and want to add that the commission is also mandated to draft alternative reports to the various treaty body mechanisms. So be it the SCPHR or UPR or CEDAW, we are also able to provide those reports. The commission itself has got a body or a governance structure, which is headed by the commissioners. There are 9 in total. And then we have the secretariat, which is headed by myself. And we are the ones who implement the policy from the body of commissioners. And the issues of child labor, they squarely fall under the Directorate of Child Rights, but they also work hand in hand with the Social Cultural Rights Directorate, as well as the Gender Directorate. And basically, within the commission, we have 6 working directorates. Now, delving into the subject matter of this discussion and the work that the commission is doing, I would want to begin with providing the current state of protections that are there on child labor in Malawi. Just when you do a quick review or a quick research of the labor distribution in Malawi, you will note that it was in 2015 where we had really the statistics being shared. And by then it was reported that almost 5 million plus children aged between 5 to 17 years are affected within the labor sector. And of these, 2.7.85 are males and 2.78 are females. So we're glad to note that there has been some disaggregation of data. And again, the statistics under the National Child Labor Survey report, which was also released in 2017, also had some percentages that they had put. But again, if you look at the 2018 MPHC or the Malawi Population Housing Census, you find that the figures that we have for children in the country have grown up to 6.3 million, aged between 5 and 17. Again, this figure is expected to continue to grow. And of the total number of children between 5 to 17, you find that 48% are working. This is illustrated in the next diagram. But just to also mention that of those children that are working in prohibited work, 20.9% are actually involved in hazardous work, while 17.1 are involved in child labor situations in the diagram that I'll show next. So the distribution of working children in the country, you find that, you know, we have those that are working children, not in child labor. That's the middle diagram I'm showing. And then you find those that are working children within the ranges of 2.6 plus million. They're at 48.1%. And then you find those that are working in hazardous work. They're at 1.63 million, according to the statistics, which translates to 20.9%. And then in child labor, you find 2.1 million, 180 million, which is translating to 38%, and other that are in other child labor. So I wanted to give this illustration through this diagram so that you understand the distribution of working children as it is categorized. Again, when you look at in terms of sectors, the majority of children are working in agriculture, forestry, hunting, and fishing sector, you know, pegged at 72%, and followed by the domestic sector, which is accounting for 23.2%. And others are working in wholesale and retail industries. But clearly from the diagram, you note that we have a lot of children working in agriculture, followed by domestic, and then the wholesale just a little bit, and then construction a little bit. And I'm not surprised because just 2 days ago, I was on an investigation, a mission with my team, and we went to one of the districts, which is predominantly known for trafficking in persons. And actually, when we went to one of the transit centers to go and have a chat with the transit center managers, we actually encountered that there were at least 20 children that had been rescued from the agriculture sector. And the ages actually were we found children that were as young as 9 years of age. And interestingly, that they were all boys. And when we sat down to listen to their stories, we found that they were all rescued from some of the farms, and they were actually being taken to cross the border to go and work in Zambia. And this is the situation of child labor. But this camp really on Monday actually demonstrated that indeed child labor is taking place in the country. Interestingly, when you look at also the demographics in terms of urban and rural, this is how Malawi is divided. You find that 46% of the children aged between 5 and 17 years work in agriculture, forestry, and industry. And again, when you look at the number in rural areas, you find that we have 75% of children that are working within the rural areas. It is not surprising that of the children that are involved in hazardous work, you find that mostly are male children in urban areas, and the female children categorized at 53% in the rural areas. This implies that more children are engaged in hazardous work in the urban areas, while more female children are involved in hazardous work in rural areas. And it is also not surprising, because when we now start, digging the statistics, for example, on child marriage, you find that there are more children within the rural areas that are not really going to school, because, and these are females, they are home and they're involved in the work. And again, just to illustrate that children that are involved in West labor of child labor as commercial sex exploitation, this comes in as a result of forced labor or herding goats, are usually the boys. And we're finding that in the small businesses and rest house, you're finding that there are really girls that are the ones that are being targeted as workers in those industries. Interestingly, Malawi has multiple legislative safeguards against child labor, and they're both international and national safeguards put in place, and international instruments. Those that are working in Malawi, like the advocates or the legislators or the ones that are specifically experts within this area, would attest that we have done very well as a country when it comes to the legal framework. Just listed in this slide, you will note that we have all the prerequisites and all the right statutes that are in place internationally. And this would also mean that someone would say, well, is the law enough? Because if we have such a vast array or a rich menu of laws, is it translating to something? We'll see. Domestically, I would say that the country has done well in terms of the constitution. For example, we just had an amendment that took place in 2017, and this amendment really allows, for example, protects children, and it really complements Section 23, which is very pivotal within the Constitution, that children must not be involved in any hazardous work which may inflict harm to their health, development, and may prevent them from attending school. So the amendment of the Constitution in 2017 was also very good, because it also defined the age of the child, and gave us a basis of aligning some of these legal provisions in our laws to the international frameworks like the CRC. So we do have also, for example, the Child Care Protection Justice Act, which again has provisions that protect children in labor situation. And then we have the Employment Act, which prohibits also employment of children below the age of 14, and also its amendments. Again, it also prohibits hazardous work for children in order so that, and also lists down, the areas of hazardous work for all the children in the sector. Just recently in 2021, we've noted that the Employment Act has been amended to include the abolished tenancy system. Most of the advocates would agree with me that the tenancy system is a system that really was allowing farmers and their families to go into debt bondage or to be used as a source of forced labor. And again, when they were doing that, they were also taking the children who were working mainly in the tobacco plantations. But in 2021, government has really done well by making sure that the system is abolished. However, we've also noted that the Employment Act has included such provisions. Continuing the same, also the Trafficking in Persons Act 2015 also does legislate against forms of child labor. But again, I think it also brings in the element of making sure that there are stiffer sentences when people are found really trafficking children for the purposes of child labor. The Education Act as well, you see that it has also made compulsory primary school education for children. Why is this important? I do believe that this is important to complement and to assist us as stakeholders, as duty bearers, as parents, to make sure that at least children are remaining in school. And then we do have the National Code of Conduct, which also has been promulgated to assist state employers and organizations when it comes to their efforts in combating child labor. The Penal Code, very important, very critical, because it does criminalize forced labor and forced prostitution. Again, you note that from the vast area of domestic legislation that is in place, as well as the international treaties, we do have policy and strategies in place. And these strategies all are aimed at or are complementing the laws are also there. They've been there placed to help us mainstream national child labor principles. Again, when you look at also the national strategies, they do make references to issues of child labor. And more importantly, recently also we've had the National Plan of Action Against Trafficking, which in itself is also a very important tool for assisting us with the national policies, again, to complement the responses that have been put in place. I would like to mention, for example, very progressive responses, for example, by Arise. It's an international organization, an NGO, where they're really doing well in terms of making sure that it's preventing children from the ages of 14 from being exposed to work which is hazardous. Again, we note a lot of by the Malawi Congress trade unions, just to also talk about preventing children from engaging in labor, but also by ensuring that most of the laws, the legal and policy frameworks that have been set in place are able to tackle child labor. Mainstreaming of child labor issues is very key, and we note that, for example, the Ministry of Labor has also been able to allocate some funds toward child labor. District assemblies, some of them have incorporated child labor in their plans, for example, when they have the child protection strategies. But again, I think there has to be more that needs to be done, because even though some of the district assemblies have incorporated this, you find that there are examples of other districts that have not been able to do so. And it also becomes difficult, for example, when you're looking at issues of budgeting, and when you're looking at the budget allocations that are given to the districts, they may not be able to address, for example, child protection strategies where they have not been included. Other programs, however, and public works, like, for example, the cash transfer program, fertilizer input subsidy program, and the school feeding program, are some of the few responses that have been put in place so that they can address issues of child labor within the country. Now, delving into the lived realities, how does this contribute to child labor in Malawi? When, I've discussed all those policy responses, programmatic responses, the legal frameworks that we have in place, one would still have, some questions as to, when you have such a rich array of literature, but also policies that have been set in place, what is the reality? What is happening on the ground? And especially for organizations like ours, like Malawi Human Rights Commission, that, are involved in monitoring or, really giving policy direction to the line ministries or working with ministries, you find that there are some key intractable challenges that children continue to face in Malawi when it comes to child labor, especially now that we are in the post-pandemic era, I would say, of COVID, or just after COVID. Poverty is still one of the biggest issues. And I know it becomes sort of like a boring song that we keep on saying poverty, but it's a reality, because Malawi stands at 51.5%, meaning that we are a country that is among the 15 poorest nations in the world, and so 1/5 of the population is said to live in extreme poverty in the country. Again, the Malawi population housing census, it actually shows that we have 51% of the national population that are children, and they are under the age of 18, with many of them living in extreme poverty. It's also very interesting and telling that most of the children that are affected with child labor or in child labor will be those ones that are from poor households and that are being headed by children themselves. So the growth of poverty as well, when you look at the district, it pushes more of the children to work in estates and also to work as to provide domestic labor in homes of affluent people. And so when you look at the whole statistics, and when you look at the issue of poverty, you find that economically child labor is less expensive, and children have been viewed by employers as more obedient than adults. So people tend to employ more children in these areas. Again, that's complemented with the growth of urbanization, which has created the demand for domestic labor in such places as Blantyre, Lilongwe, Mzuzu, and Zomba. And I step those four because these are our main cities in the country. And looking at the question of HIV and AIDS and orphanhood, this also contributes to really the issues of labor, where you find that 1/5 of Malawian children between the ages of 0 to 14 are orphans. So if they are orphans, it means that the heads of some of the households become children as early as I said earlier. And most of them, you'd find that they are also heading, household, and they find themselves in situation of labor because they have to support their siblings. Lack of access to education is also very key when we look at, the lived realities. And, with there being no form of education, children resort to child labor in the country. And so they may have something to do during the days to pass time and to contribute to family living. So for example, for those that have traveled in Malawi, when you leave, for example, Lilongwe going to Blantyre, you find that most of the children there maybe are involved in selling products or produce. It is because they're not going to school. And this is so true that when you also ask them that, why are they not going to school? They say that they want to make a living because they don't have any food. So the situation is further worsened with family members with HIV and AIDS, or those that live orphans after the death of a family member. It means these children become vulnerable and are really exposed to hazardous and worse forms of child labor. And in terms of also the lived realities that are being experienced, Malawi, and maybe unlike some other countries, also has been doing a campaign lately on the birth registrations. So through the government, Malawi launched a compulsory birth registration process in 2017. But this mass registration, interestingly, only was done for those that were 16 and above. And these were issued identity cards. And when we looked at the statistics, we noted that a total of 8.4 million children are still unregistered in the country. These are children that have been born before 2017, who are below the age of 16. So because these children have no birth registration certificate, it becomes problematic to detect where they're coming from. And these children are the ones that you find that they are prone to exploitation. And so the ones that, for example, we found in Ginji just 2 days ago, a typical example of those ones, they did not have any IDs. And when we asked some of them how old they were, they didn't know their age, but some would say, I think I'm 5 or I think I'm 9. So that is really a problem. So again, government through the National Registration Bureau between October and November this year tried to roll out a pilot phase for mass registration of children. And we know that now the program is facing financial constraints, and it's also going to likely, be difficult to complete it because government doesn't have enough resources for the same. But the situation really is very challenging because it does give risk. It does raise the problem of child labor, but it also makes it difficult to monitor and track such children, especially in trafficking situations. Again, harmful cultural practices. I think I talked about the issue of child marriage, but just to also mention that cultural practices as initiation ceremonies have also been found to encourage early child marriages and increase the risk of also contracting HIV and AIDS. In terms of also their lived experience when it comes to the household size, I think mentioning earlier, Malawi really notes that we are at 4.4 persons per household, which is one of the highest. And again, the fertility rates are high in the country. And when you look at all the data, for example, from Zomba, the National Statistics Office, it's very interesting to note that the larger the household, you find that some of the children barely manage to survive, and then they resort to labor. Trafficking in persons, I think I've made several references to it, but I would want to make one notable observation, particularly with the recent case. Maybe some of you were exposed to it, but it's very interesting. You may wish to look it up under the BBC website. This is a case that is involving Chinese nationals that were exploiting Malawian children in one area of Lilongwe and Kamwendo in Chinji again. They were shooting videos which were being sold in China between the years, you can imagine, years of 2019 to 2022. And they were sold up to $70, which is 55 pounds, I think now in pounds, but $70 on Chinese social media platforms. This really rocked the country. The commission is involved right now. We are investigating this matter. Happy to note, of course, that prosecution and the others have worked to bring the perpetrator to book. But of course, the case is ongoing in court. But these are some of the areas that you'd find a lot of exploitation like cybercrime, but also, other nationals coming in the country to exploit children for the purposes of, these videos, that were being sold. So when you look at, the issues around the cybercrime and also what is being sold on social media platforms, it was very shocking that some of us were not even in the know. We didn't know that these things are happening. So there was also sort of like some form of collusion, with some district officials who knew about this syndicate, but it only came to light through that documentary. So COVID-19, when you look at it, really has worsened the situation by pushing children into exploitative and dangerous work due to the unprecedented economic impact. And I would say that maybe before 2015, we had it all in control. We knew where we were going, as a country, but COVID-19 has definitely disrupted the way we do things. Again, I think limited awareness and weak implementation of the available legal frameworks that I just mentioned earlier is also very key, because if communities, especially those that are duty bearers, are not able to understand or to know the laws that are available, the legal policies that are available or that are in place, it becomes problematic. But more importantly, again, I think those that are tasked with law enforcement, for example, the district social work officers and others, have still mobility challenges to really uncover some of these issues, especially when the matters are happening within or, with areas that are remote or hard to reach areas. And so the low funding ceiling towards child labor issues to the councils, especially the district labor office and the district social welfare offices, is a huge handicap that really makes it very difficult for us to make advancements. So the advancements that are there are really moderate. They're not really so much. However, it's very promising. For example, within the year of July 2021, last year, to February 2022, 111 child labor violations were handled by the Labor Office. So this information is readily available. And 98 children were withdrawn from child labor. 44% were sent back to school, and 4 were placed in vocational training, and others have been receiving rehabilitation measures. But again, we still find that, in some other areas, it may be difficult and there could be more. And in terms of trafficking as well, we noted that, some were also rescued and are receiving rehabilitation measures. One of the things that I was also stressing to one of the colleagues who I was chatting with in terms of, how is this all panning out? One of the issues that I think must be noted for Malawi is our weak poor coordination. So although the government has established mechanisms to coordinate its efforts to address child labor, comprised of also, some governance structures that are on the ground nationally as well as at the district level, coordination remains a big challenge. And simply because there is not enough funding to make sure that, coordination mechanisms are working, or even simply put, meetings are being done to really track, the progress, to look at the indicators, and to also look at, the programmatic responses. So weak coordination between the police, for example, the labor offices, makes it difficult to eradicate some of the worst forms of child labor, such as trafficking. So in one of the districts where we went, instead of them telling us how well they are working with the police, or instead of the police explaining how well they are working with the district committees, for example, like the labor office, they were telling us they are working well with NGOs, meaning that somewhere also there's a break in the link. So it's like they're either relying on the NGOs to do the work, the police are not doing their work, or the child protection workers are doing the work alone and they're not working with the police. So you find that it's fragmented in most respects, but also there is weak coordination. Again, I think the gaps in some of the laws, even though we have the laws that are in place, there's still some gaps in the laws. And I believe that this is also an area where, we need to make sure that we are harmonizing so that we remove the inconsistencies, for example, in the definition of the child in most of the child related issues. For example, other laws are defining it differently, but we just need to have that harmonization since the Constitution was amended. Now, maybe going to what could be done more to enhance the protection after sharing these challenges beyond existing legislation. especially where maybe legislation is weak to address some of these issues. I would say that, it does require a holistic approach, or else all interventions will continue registering minimal impact. And, I do make some of these recommendations in line also with some of the programs that are there, for example, that are addressing issues of nutrition, or that are addressing issues of gender-based violence. We can get some of the promising results or promising achievements that have taken place, to also possibly use that, use those experiences to assist us in the economic empowerment programs. So, for example, government could scale up economic empowerment programs targeting the ultra-poor families, with the statistics that I had shown. There are those that are at risk of child labor. So these may be withdrawn, but they need to be cushioned so that they should not be falling into the trap. Again, I think learning from other institutions that are working on the ground, including the UN, the scaling up of social protection programs is also very key, because I think these programs are able to cushion children at risk of child labor, and also improve, for example, the equality and equitable education. Investment in education is still an issue. We must still continue doing well, I think, as a nation, but I would believe that this would lead to a high number of children attending schools in order to avoid or to reduce child labor. Again, government is also obliged to make sure that they're enforcing the laws and policies in place, especially where the issues of free and compulsory primary school education for all children, so that at least we find less children being in situations of labor. Again, government has got user fees in both primary school and secondary school. We would advocate and lobby and join those that are lobbying to say that there must be a complete removal of user fees in schools. And more importantly, I think also the review of the curriculum is very critical, so that we can have a curriculum that is more skills-based, to incorporate other skills that children may learn, like local manufacturing. For example, there's a very good initiative by Project Innovation into the education curriculum. I think this would, in the long run, create jobs and improve our economy, but also the economy and also the issues that we are facing within this sector. Again, I think I mentioned earlier about the expediting the rolling of mass registration for children. Yes, there are financial constraints, but I think this is very, very important because it will strengthen the protection of children from child labor and other violations that these children are meeting. Increased awareness cannot be emphasized, because without awareness, then it means people are not knowledgeable. So again, I think there is need for more awareness to be done. And just looking at how COVID has affected most countries, you find that most NGOs now, there's been a shrinking space in terms of their funding. There's not enough funding going towards NGOs, and also there's not enough funding going to the district councils. So you find that most of the activities have stalled, and that's the reason why we even have trafficking in persons also growing higher, or child trafficking numbers rising every day. But again, I believe that strengthening the existing legal and policy framework is very important, as I've discussed about the harmonization. But more importantly, I think in this regard, also of the view that we need to finalize the child labor policy, which has been in draft form for more than 7 years now. I guess this is very critical, because if we harmonize that, it will also help us to understand and also to track, the progress that we're doing as a nation. This is just a quick picture to show the work that MHRC does when it comes to child labor issues. And this is, I think, one of the colleagues a few months ago, where, we take children, school children or pupils as a main stakeholder. And this is just one of the sessions that was being done in this district. And actually child labor was also one of the key areas that was being discussed. Again, when it comes to Malawi Human Rights Commission's involvement in this, we've had national level strategic engagements with key actors, especially the Ministry of Education and also the Ministry of Labor itself. And previously, when you look at our work, we've lobbied, for example, the amendments of some of the key important pieces of legislation. And we've also monitor the implementation and enforcement of the tenancy law, which I believe that we submitted papers, but we will continue conducting lobbying meetings, because having the laws in place is one thing, but making sure that there's implementation and enforcement is another. And again, I think with also the commissioners, we normally issue position papers, policy briefs, and also monitor treaty body recommendations when it comes to child labor issues and also trafficking in general through the various treaty body mechanisms. And this is also something that the Commission has been doing, issuing advisory notes to government on issues of child labor. We've recently been involved, for example, in addressing the issues of human trafficking, but also isolating these issues through the various directorates, making sure that we are, reminding government of its obligations towards issues of child labor, the enforcement, the implementation, and also even tracking budgets. So we've also engaged different parliamentary committees, particularly on the budget issue, as well as providing reports on the status of some of these areas that pertain to human rights. Again, I think the Commission is very, very key because our mandate empowers us to investigate cases of child labor. And it should be noted that even though we do investigate, we commend the District Labor and Social Welfare Office, which has got the bigger role, the critical mandate to do the same. So we do also work with the District Labor and Social Welfare Office when we encounter these cases. And monitoring is also one of our key functions. And one such area, for example, that the Commission has been doing lately is to just monitor the impact of small-scale mining on the rights of children and whether and how they are working in this sector. And so the findings of this report were already shared with government and some CSO organizations. Again, it's very critical that as we engage, for example, in the picture that I had shown earlier, that we must leaders, we must engage with the teachers, because there are a number of good laws tackling child labor, but as implementation becomes a barrier, it is one of our key functions as a Commission to take these laws to the people to make sure that we are also raising awareness on the same, but also we are at the center of disseminating information in forms of child labor and the effect it has in humanitarian context, removal of street begging children and anti-trafficking platforms. So since 2020, we've also done some reports, for example, street begging children, because they are also prone to child labor exploitation. In terms of advocacy, I believe that lobbying for coordination mechanism to be strengthened is one of our key functions, and I do believe that both at the national and district level we must strengthen this, because if we do not strengthen, then it means those structures may not even have the powers to reach to Parliament, but also to advocate for their own needs. So engagement with the district executive committees, for example, and the chiefs and some of the religious community leaders has been very, very important. So the case that I referred to, for example, in Kasungu, Mchinji, and Lilongwe, where the Chinese nationals were exploiting children, we noted that there were issues of also awareness, that the communities were not aware that some of these issues that they were involved in were actually increasing towards the violation of those children. So yes, the Chinese were able to exploit, but at the same time, I think the duty bearers that were responsible within those districts were not able to understand that they were also contributing to the same. So engagement is very important, especially strengthening network through stakeholders and also promoting referral mechanisms or systems for the purposes of addressing child labor violations. Again, I think it's also very important that as we look at the whole issues of laws, policies, programmatic responses, we should not forget also the tools that the communities use. So for example, the child rights friendly bylaws that are being used by religious leaders or traditional leaders, where they are very important in strengthening the response and referral mechanisms on child labor. And I believe that these are very important tools, these are very important instruments, and cannot be ignored. But those that are working in those districts, especially NGOs or the government itself through the district assembly, must be able to sit down to also review and also assist to make sure that the friendly bylaws are human rights friendly, but also are gender responsive, are disability friendly, to help in strengthening the response at the district level. And finally, and more importantly, I think the work that we're doing with the private sector as a country in general is not very strong. And I do believe that even as a commission, we have not really engaged so much the private sector when it comes to a focus on child safeguarding and child rights business principles. And it's an area that I think now, with our engagement with other treaty body mechanisms like OHCHR and the Danish Human Rights Institute, it's going to help the Malawi Human Rights Commission to strengthen its capacity within these areas, because I think engaging with the private sector is very key, but also child safeguarding and child rights principles are so key now, especially when we look at how, you know, the mining industry is growing, and also when we look at how industries are coming up in terms of maybe road constructions. We need to make sure that we're engaging with those. So I think at this note, I would say that we are doing well in terms of the legislation, the policy, and the responses. You know, on paper, it's fantastic. We have at least the blueprint to guide us. But again, I think when it comes to implementation, we need to do well. And it really starts with the coordination, both at the district level, at the national level, and also with other stakeholders also coming together, strengthening these networks so that referral is productive, but also we are able to address the root causes and also the issues that still remain when it comes to addressing child rights violations within Malawi, particularly when it comes to child labor. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Habiba, for the insight. Allow me to applaud you for that, and let everyone who can join me applaud you for such an insightful talk and provoking our thoughts into that. We really thank you for such an insight. At this moment in time, there might be some that might have questions or reflections after your talk. Obviously, there is a thought that has been provoked in some other people about what you have shared. And at this moment in time, I would like to invite questions from the participants. All right, let's start from Mitra. Please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Okay. Before I proceed, I want to say thank you so much, Habiba. Really applause. It was such a wonderful and enriching presentation and talk. I think it's always obvious, or rather gratifying, when experts offer their expertise and opinion and experiences on such important issues. Thank you so much. You also raised a number of issues that I was not expecting that you would even raise, how the problem of child labor also intersects with human trafficking, which is also an area that I'm very much involved in. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. I have about 2 questions, but let me just start with one, because I recently, with my PI, we recently just developed a first draft of a paper that we are looking to publish. And it deals with how child labor actually intersects with human trafficking. So a part of the question we are asking is there a problem with our imagination of children in Africa? You know, because children in Africa contend with a lot of existential issues, like you mentioned about the Chinese, like you mentioned about street begging. So children who are engaged in street begging or hawking in the street are prone to, you know, falling into the hands of traffickers, of people who will exploit them. When we think of these issues, and then we come to the issue of poverty, are we able to deal with this, with how safe children can be, or how much we can protect them from child labor or exploitation, if we don't deal with the issue of poverty? Is there any way, you know, from your experience, you know, I mean, there would be different strategies of approaching child labor, you know, to be able to deal with the problem. But do you see, from your experience, is there any way, or are there ways in which we can deal with the problem of child labor without dealing with the problem of poverty. And what do you consider? Do you think our imagination of children, do you think, is there a problem with our imagination of children in Africa? Because if we consider children as people that are vulnerable, if we consider children as beings that deserve special care, you know, according to the Charter of Children's Rights in Africa, it specifically says children are beings that deserve special care. So if we consider children in that way, how come you know, children in the continent are exposed to this, you know, to these sorts of violations? Thank you. I hope I haven't asked for too much.
I think Habiba has taken note of those questions, but quickly I would go to Richard Obina so that Habiba tackles the questions together. Richard, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, please.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you so much to the presenter for a very good and very enlightening presentation. My question is very simple. You have just given us a good presentation, an enlightening one, concerning the work that your commission does in Uganda. In Malawi, in the fight against human trafficking, which is an area that I'm very much interested in, and I've been working in that area for some time now. I just want to ask a very simple question: whether your commission, there is a friction. Do you experience friction in any way in the work that your commission does and the work that the ombudsman in Malawi does, in terms of the sharing of resources and very scarce resources for that matter, because the works also seem similar? And yes, in situations like that, as we have experienced in other countries, the issue of budgeting does become a challenge to some extent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard, for the question. And for this session, lastly, let me go to Raymond, please.
All right. Thank you very much, Gift, and thank you very much, Habiba, for the wonderful presentation. I think I missed a lot of it, and I can imagine that I would have enjoyed myself very well if I was here from the beginning, but I will still make a little contribution. I don't know whether it's a question, but I would consider it more of a caution than a question. So I guess from the last bit of your presentation and also from Mitterrand's comments, that poverty, of course, we all know is a big issue when it comes to child labor. But I think sometimes we also tend to be a bit more cautious, or we have to be a bit more cautious when we look at the child labor poverty relationship. And I say this regarding your recommendation that we should focus on poverty reduction strategies and policies. I say this because of my own work and the literature on child labor and poverty in Africa, to be precise. So recently I have done a bit of work on child labor in Malawi, where I looked at the relationship between, for example, a poverty reduction policy like the Malawi Farm Input Subsidy Program and its impact on child labor. So definitely one would think that a policy like that should increase the incomes of small-scale farmers and thereby reduce child labor. But I realized in this study that this isn't the case at all. You rather find that people who are benefiting from this input are also engaging more in child labor. And the answer is very simple. It's because farmers are taking advantage of this input to increase their income. And this definitely would mean that they would have to employ more children sometimes to actually increase the size of their land. So my recommendation or my point is that sometimes when we are talking about poverty reduction as it relates to child labor, we should be a bit cautious. And if we actually want to fight child labor, then we should have an inbuilt mechanism in these policies that will actually safeguard against child labor. For instance, so again, for the Farm Input Subsidy Program, for instance, one would think of looking at the performance of these children and looking at their school records to ensure that before, for example, a farmer receives some of these inputs, these records are in order and they are in favor of the child. So this would be just a cautious statement that I want to put in. But I guess at the last bit of your presentation, that's when I came in anyways, I heard you talk about child labor related prosecutions in Malawi. And this is an information that I am personally interested in for my research. So I don't know if maybe we can talk about this later, or we can make, I mean, just to ask if this data is available. Thank you very much, Gift and Habiba.
Okay, thank you so much, Raymond, for the question. Habiba, there are those questions. Your take, please, before we go to the next session.
Thank you for those questions. I think maybe let me begin with the poverty one, because I think the first one was also very philosophical, and possibly if I was a student, a child labor student, or doing some research on child labor, I would find the first question very difficult to answer. Maybe I would say, okay, let's do some research. But no, just to say that I do believe that indeed issues of child labor intersect with trafficking, and the issue of poverty is very central to the discussion around these areas. Again, I think when I was making the presentation, I made it very clear that for us to address this intractable problem of child labor within our spaces, or within Malawi, or within our region, it does require, a holistic approach, or else all the interventions that we continue registering would have, minimal impact. And we cannot be talking about, for example, scaling up of economic empowerment programs to address poverty if indeed we're not able to also, combine that with other areas like, improving access to quality and equitable education. And I do mean like not only education that we know it, but also even, looking at, tertiary and making it relevant to the local needs and situations. And we should say that indeed, for example, like Raymond mentioned the issue of poverty reduction strategies, that we are also arguing to say that, when we're doing this poverty reduction strategies or programs, they must not be piecemeal, because I find that problematic, because when you have these piecemeal interventions, it means that you're not really going to be able to address the issues holistically. And just for the issues, for example, when you talk about farming, 80% of the population really relies on farm. I mean, 80% are into agriculture and are working within the agriculture space. And you find that most of those ones that are working within the agriculture space are also women. And then you find the problem that, most of these women maybe do not also have husbands, but they have children, and then they use their children, for example, for farming purposes, etc. So also when you're looking at the economic empowerment programs, again, you would also combine that with issues of, for example, of gender equality, empowering them, using the right tools, the knowledge, but giving also the communities information that should also help them understand that whilst they are farming, or whilst they are into that situation, they must make sure that they are able to send their children to school. And again, I think when I was mentioning the issues about schooling, I made reference to the issue about making tuition adequate, but making it also applicable to all, including, for example, engaging with the schools to give them the powers, even the bursaries, to give children bursaries, because we note that, for example, in some of these schools, we find that there are still hidden expenses that would not be able to address the burden of school fees for poor students. So in the end, indeed, these students or these children end up being exploited in some of these in some of these issues, in some of these areas, like like the farming, or places of herding cattle, for example. So I do believe that for us to have the issues of poverty being addressed, we really need to make sure that we are not only expecting that government will be able to address all of these things itself, but even those that are helping government cushion the problems or the challenges must be able to make sure that they're scaling up their protection programs well, but equitably, but at the same time ensuring also that they're combining that with proper information and knowledge. So that's how I would answer it. But I would say that the problem of poverty is not something that will leave us now in Africa. Again, I think it also does require an overhaul of our policies to see, what is working for us and what works with the people, because sometimes this top-up approach where we, it's only the elites coming up with these policies and not really engaging with the communities can become problematic, because sometimes we feel that whatever we're coming up with will be satisfactory, will achieve results, when in essence, when we haven't included even the communities themselves, or we haven't included the people themselves, it becomes problematic. So again, I think some of these policies are good on paper, but when it comes to translating them, we're finding that they're still problematic, especially now. And learning maybe from those countries that are doing well would also be ideal. But I would say that each and every administration must really make sure that whenever they're addressing these issues, they should have a holistic approach that does not only look at one thing, one area, but also they must really combine it with knowledge, the knowledge, and also combine it with proper information that people must be given. But again, I think even those that are tasked at the district level, they're very critical. And sometimes I find that the funding that goes to the district is also something that becomes very difficult for people even to respond to the challenges that are within the rural areas. Because when you looked at the statistics, you find that there are more children within the rural area that are involved in child labor. Now, of course, we are seeing the numbers rising within the urban areas. Again, you'd find that who's addressing these issues within the urban setup? Maybe in the urban areas, you have the district councils that have drawn up their maps, but in the urban areas, it may be also very problematic, and the urban poor keeps on rising. And it's also very difficult maybe to track and detect. So again, in Malawi, the issues that are being advanced, for example, by the National Registration Bureau, to make sure that, we have identity cards, or we register all the children that are in households that are living alone, or that those that do not have families or depend or anyone looking after them, is very critical, because I think government then will have records of those families, but also have records of those children that are within those districts. I think there was also another question by Richard, where he asked a very simple question: is there friction between the Commission and the Ombudsman? I would not say that there's friction in Malawi that I'm aware of since I joined the Commission. In fact, I think there's complementarity, which is a very good thing. For example, the case that I just mentioned of the Chinese nationals that were exploiting children, we are working actually with the Ombudsman's office. We are doing a joint investigation. Of course, as I said, that this joint investigation is also very broad, because it's not only looking at the labor violations that took place, but it's also looking at the role, for example, of the immigration, the police, the Ministry of Homeland Security, the Ministry of Labor, and looking at also, how these people even procure their documents when they come to Malawi. Again, we would rely on the Ministry of, we would rely on the Ombudsman, for example, to look at some of these processes and to probe more the system or the structures that were used, for example, for these people to access or to find themselves in the communities. Again, the Commission comes in to complement that work by looking now at the human rights violations that are happening within the setup of, let's say, the agriculture, whether it's an industrial or, just within the area of cyber crimes that were taking place. So it's actually quite complementary. But one big challenge that we all have jointly, not only with the Ombudsman's office, I would say that for the governance institutions in general, is that we do not have enough funding. And I think I was in the papers 3 days ago lamenting the fact that governance institutions are still left behind when it comes to issues of finances. And these finances are very critical to assist us with the investigations, with the monitoring, but also with just pushing for the activities that need to be pushed. So without funding to governance institutions, you paralyze them, you handicap them to be able to, work effectively to eradicate some of these worst forms of child labor, such as trafficking in children and even prostitution. So I would say there's so much of complementarity. And just to put it on record that even the current ombudsman that is working there right now, she used to work for Malawi Human Rights Commission in my position as the executive secretary. So I think she also understands the realities that we have as a commission, and actually it works in our favor because now we also tapping into the high expertise, but the fact that she's also well-versed in human rights issues works well to our advantage. So I would say it's more like complementarity in Malawi, not so much as the overlaps as maybe you may experience in Uganda. But more importantly, I think what is the common denominator that we all have is the issue of funding, which now becomes problematic when it comes for us to coordinate on some of the activities. But where we can, we are working together very well. So I just wanted to also answer it in that regard. Thank you, and over.
Okay, thank you, Habiba, for that. There are some few questions in the chat before I go to people that have raised their hands. Albert, I think you have tackled that question, but I'll still go on and read it. What efforts has the Commission put in place to sensitize the rural masses on this issue and also cyberbullying? He has in mind the incident that took place in Njewa in the Rongo area, where some foreign nationals took advantage of innocent kids. So I think in your response, you tackled that. There was also a question related to the link between poverty and child labor, which are directly related by Nicole. To a certain extent, you have also tackled that. From now, let me go to Tapiwa and then Georgian Michael. I don't know if I've pronounced that right. And then Priscilla, in that order. Tapiwa, Michael, and Priscilla. Tapiwa, unmute yourself and ask the question, please.
Hello. So I just want to say thank you for that discussion about child labor laws. It was very enlightening. My question is sort of a two-parter. First, it's to do with like cultural attitudes or social attitudes towards the issue. Do you find that in your work, or have you found in your work that social attitudes sort of influence how the laws are being sort of taken seriously? In the sense that you mentioned there is a robust sort of legal framework for preventing these sort of child labor violations from going on. Do you find that with the certain, with law, sort of the social attitudes have to change with the law. So do you find that the cultural attitudes haven't changed? And if so, what would the Commission do to sort of change cultural attitudes towards it? Because I feel like some people find that there's no problem in child labor because it's just, they've been part of it growing up and it's intergenerational. So how would the Commission go about changing these attitudes and these, these attitudes towards it?
Thank you, Tapiwa. Georgine?
Yeah, this is Beoye Humiji. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Bayreuth, and I'm working also in similar topic, but from the social anthropology position. And when I follow your presentation, I see that like solution, you just say a few words about local-based strategy. And as we all know, the hands that give money always stop in the top. And you right now also say that the government, the local government does not support you enough in your work. And then my question is, do you think that continue implementing Western-based solution and strategy in this area can motivate the government to sponsor, to give money to support it? Because I can also exactly on the same the other side, if before international organization supports these in this area, give the support, give financement in this area, the solution must be based on their policy that we all have in the International Convention. So the first, my question that I was asking is, are there really now enough support from the local government, and why there are not enough support, financial support from them? And the second is that, is it not now the time that African countries try to find out local philosophy, local perspective based on children in their policy of children protection? Thank you.
Lastly, Tawe, Priscilla.
Thank you, Gift. I think you've noted that I've lowered my hand.
Okay, all right.
I raised my hand the moment I saw Albert Dambula's question on what efforts the Commission has put in place to sensitize the rural masses with regard to the issue of SUSU, the Njera issue. Basically, I wanted to say that I think Habiba has already talked about it, but I wanted to add to say that in terms of sensitizing the rural masses, immediately we learned about the issue. We went in the rural areas in the communities where we had engaged the duty bearers, and these are the chiefs, the police, the social care officers, just to sensitize or remind them about the role that they have, because we noted that all this was happening. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, because we noted that they were all aware about what was happening with the Chinese national. So we engaged them. We also visited the places where these instances are taking place. Because in the course of our investigations, we noted that it's not only in Njera area, there are also other places where similar instances had been taking places involving the same people. So we visited people from all those places and raised awareness on the issues to do with child rights, child exploitation, but also issues of child labor came out. So that's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Habiba, would you address the questions that came from the two participants, please?
I think from Georgine, is it Georgine? I think his question was really talking about, the support to local government. I think one of the issues that I talked about is the engagement with the district executive committees that are available to the work for example, addressing gender-based violence or other areas, including child labor. And just to say that the Commission really believes that, yes, it is very important that the district executive committees must be empowered to undertake this work, because they are the ones that are closer to the people, but they are also the governance structure within the district setup. So without the district assembly or without the district council, we would not be able to achieve some of these activities, or will not be able to have the entry points. So they are very critical. Again, I think our role as Malawi Human Rights Commission is to make sure that we are engaging them for the purposes of making sure that they are undertaking their work and promoting human rights and protecting, those human rights. So for us, what we do as a commission, we basically make sure that as we're engaging them, we are also advising them that we are a referral mechanism we're referee mechanism when it comes to addressing child rights violations, because that is our role and that is what we are mandated to do as a commission. But again, I do believe that the district, whether executive committees or any other, setup like the child protection workers or the social welfare cannot work alone. They also work with NGOs within those communities, because sometimes it could be that the NGOs are the ones that have funding, for example, to carry out activities or interventions. Unlike some countries, advanced countries, where government has enough money to do that, in Malawi it's different. So you find that it's either the UN or the NGOs that are working. Ideally, we would want a situation where government is really also leading in terms of undertaking all interventions. But more importantly, I think even where government does not have funding, its role is to make sure that they are coordinating all these referral systems in place. Maybe answering the second part, I do believe that indeed we need to have local owned solutions, homegrown based mechanisms for addressing the issues that we have when it comes to issues of child labor. And I guess that's the reason why maybe a long time ago, or not long time ago, but we note that in Africa, the spirit of Ubuntu allows us, for example, to have, the extended family structure, but where now you have that more children are being headed, more children are being headed also by children themselves, like child-headed households, you find that, it's becoming problematic because either their family members have died or they do not have, they've been deserted. So there are these issues that are coming up, but that's where now it's very influential to deal with traditional leaders, who I believe also have taken up a very important role when it comes to scaling up, child rights friendly bylaws, that are human rights friendly. But I think their role is also very critical in making sure that they are the first point of call, or they are the entry point when it comes to strengthening the response and referral mechanisms when something happens within the districts. So for those leaders, for example, that are dealing with child marriage, they'll tell you that they go household, they go to each and every household to record and document how many children are in there. And then they also have other programs, for example, that enforce the children to be in school. I think those kind of locally grown solutions are very important, because it has actually helped when we look at child marriage interventions, like in Dedza being done by Chief Kajindamoto, where she actually took that approach. So I do believe that there are positive responses that can be done, but we should not really undermine the important role of traditional leaders, which I think is also very key within the African setup, that they have a role to play. Others may have religious leaders, maybe like Ethiopia, but us, we do believe that traditional leaders are very key when it comes to the purposes of scaling up child rights environments. Again, they can also be perpetrators, let's not forget, but more importantly, I think as we engage as the Commission or with other stakeholders that we're working, traditional leaders are very key as the key stakeholders in some of the interventions that we are taking place. And talking about social attitudes and social norms, indeed, I do believe that they have a way of influencing the way laws are done, but also the way laws are understood, interpreted, but also implemented. So it's also very key that as we come up with these laws, we must also make sure we're coming up with friendly tools that the communities can understand. Sometimes we come up with these laws, we forget that these laws will need to be interpreted, but will also need to be understood by those people that are supposed to enjoy them as rights. So as Malawi Human Rights Commission, one of our key roles is to make sure that we are also simplifying the messages that we have. Like I think in the picture that I showed you there, it's very critical that even as we engage the chiefs, we are also engaging the children themselves. It's a participatory approach that the Commission takes. But I do believe that, yes, indeed, as we are doing our interventions, not as the Commission only, but all stakeholders, there's need to really consider the issue of social norms, the attitudes and behaviors that still persist or bring in negative elements that still remain and are ingrained in our society. And I think we need to tackle all these interventions holistically, and making sure that, at the end of the day, we are having, child-friendly programming, or we are having, human rights-based, human rights-based responses that are understood by all. So this requires really continuous engagement and continuous learning and raising awareness. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Habiba, for that. In the interest of time, please allow me to close the question and answer sessions. There are a number of insights from the chat. I would invite all of us to engage with the link that I've provided. It's the link for African Legal Studies projects, which are where this project falls under, where we can engage with you in whatever sense that they might be. I would like to thank everyone from my side. I don't know if Professor Kaime is around to say some closing remarks. Okay, if he's not around, let me go back to Uche because he also started the session to close the session. Professor Uchenna, please.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time, Habiba, for this wonderful presentation. We thank you very much, not just for the insights, but for the humanity that you bring along with those insights you shared for us. We appreciate the work that you and your team are doing over there in Malawi, and I believe also you know, in the entire continent, because there is a sense in which most of these activities are interconnected. We continue to hope that the challenge of human rights, the challenge of humanizing our continent will be something that all of us will somehow, at some point in our lifetimes, have reason to say is a project that can be accomplished, because we have sufficient reasons to believe that that truly is a possibility. So thank you very much. We wish you well, and we hope that we will continue to have conversations with you beyond this platform. And yeah, thanks to all the people that joined us today. We hope that you continue to engage with the working groups. Gift has provided you the address to do so should you wish to engage with us. Ask questions, tell us what you think, tell us what you think we should be doing, not just what you think about what we are doing. All right, thank you very much. Over to you, Gift.
Thank you so much, Professor Uchenna, and everyone who participated. Once again, thank you, Habiba, for your insights. Next week, we are having another session on Thursday, the 3rd of November, with another gentleman who will share us his insights. He's also from Malawi, and is talking about the same topic of child labor. And the sessions continue in the other weeks. We are talking about human trafficking, and the last 2 weeks, you're talking about LGBTIQ+ rights. To everyone from me and the rest of the team at the African Legal Studies and the University of Beirut and the University of Rhodes, thank you so much for taking time to participate in this session. Thank you. Have a good afternoon, morning, and evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.